I think first and foremost, it starts with our story. I truly believe that our story drives the way that we view education. It gives us a lens through which we can look at some of the most pertinent issues that impact our system. And if we're able to own that narrative, if we're able to lean into that story, that's what helps us maintain our authenticity and our integrity as teachers.
Hey, this is Jake Small, author of For Every Black Boy, and you're listening to EdUp Xcelerated Excellence.
This episode of EdUp Xcelerated Excellence is supported by the 2.0 conferences to be held in Las Vegas, Nevada, April 7th through 9th, 2026. Business leaders, educators, healthcare experts, marketing and tech professionals, and founding entrepreneurs are welcome to take part. Reserve your space today and receive a 15% discount courtesy of EdUp Xcelerated Excellence with the code EDUPXE15OFF. That's EDUPXE15OFF. Check the show notes for more information or learn more and register online at the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EDUPXE15OFF.
Are you an educational leader or organization seeking innovation or just a new perspective? Then look no further. Xcelerated Excellence Consulting is dedicated to offering support to educational leaders and their organizations to meet their full potential for excellence. Services include strategic planning and problem solving, continuous improvement expertise in areas such as assessment and accreditation, and professional development, empowering leaders, individuals, and groups for personal growth for organizational excellence. To learn more, find us online at xeconsulting.org. That's xeconsulting.org. As students, we are all familiar with the experience of having a great teacher. Their motivation inspires us. We feel safe enough to express our struggles and to address them. But have you wondered, what are the makings of an excellent educator? Is it their educational training and experience, or is something more tacit at play? In this second half of a two-part episode, our guest, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, shares with us how identity shapes teacher excellence and equity. Welcome to EdUp Xcelerated Excellence, the podcast for the advancement of educational excellence and equity. I'm your host, Jacob Easley, the second PhD PMP, and today's guest is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. He is the founder of Identity Talk Consulting, a global educational consulting firm, author of the book Learning to Relearn, and creator of the podcast by the same name, Identity Talk. So, Kwame, welcome to the show and our series on the impact of media and marketing, in particular in education. Would you introduce yourself to the EdUp Xcelerated Excellence community, giving voice to your name, and just tell us a bit about what's in your sphere at this moment?
Yeah, first off, thank you so much for having me on. For those who are listening, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. My name is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and I am here as an 18-year educator. I started my career as a middle school math teacher in Philadelphia. Did that for 5 years, and then eventually moved to Boston for another 5. And Now I'm here abroad with my family and have been for the past 6 years, where I've worked as a freelance education consultant through my firm IPPY Consulting, which has had the privilege of working with more than 35 different schools, districts, and organizations over the past 6 years. And in Identity Talk, we cover the 3 pillars. So that's identity affirming education, culturally responsive teaching, and anti-bias, anti-racist practices. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm certain that you're going to learn a lot more by the end of this conversation.
Now, on your podcast, you do engage guests from across the globe, and based on those conversations, and I think I want to talk about the global South, particularly the continent of Africa where you are right now, and the U.S. What can you learn from the comparisons when you speak to folks from different parts of the world, particularly in the global South and perhaps the Western society?
Yeah, it's always interesting. I think when I look at the different interviews I've done with African educators and a lot of educators who are based in the States, it's always interesting to hear how they've been otherized in their specific context. So just thinking about African educators, for example, I've interviewed African educators who are in international schools in other parts of the world. And they tell me stories about how they've experienced racism, how they know they are the most credentialed person on their staff, but they don't get the opportunities, or they don't get promoted to leadership opportunities because of the fact that they are who they are in terms of just the color, the skin, or even just how they're discriminated against because of the way they speak and their accent. There's so many different ways in which they get dehumanized and ostracized, right? Also, just I've gotten stories of gaslighting, right? Stories where the guests have been gaslighted in their particular context, especially when they've identified or they've been harmed, and how that narrative gets twisted, usually by non-melanated staff members who want to try to white explain, or they want to try to, sugarcoat what's happening and not acknowledging the harm that's been done. So the stories vary, but I would say the recurring thing that I would say I've heard on my podcast, especially when it comes to my African guests, is the fact that they're not always prioritized in their respective school communities. They're not prioritized when it comes to their professional development. They're not prioritized when it comes to opportunities for professional growth, whether it's job promotions or other leadership opportunities. And there's this misconception that they are less than. And a lot of it just stems from colonialism. If we're going to go there, it stems from that. Because in international schools, you have white European or white American educators who occupy those classroom teaching spaces. They're the ones that are the administrators, especially on the continent of Africa. You go to 90% of international schools on this continent, I can put money on it that the principal or the head of school is going to be a white person. And it's designed to be that way. So when you have a situation like that, where you have somebody coming into your country, leading your school, and they try to tell you what's best for you, when you're the one who is born and raised in this country, and you know what's going on in that space, but you're not in a position to provide valuable input that's going to allow for expat teachers to come in and understand the full concepts of what's going on because of the power dynamics. So that's a real thing that's still happening on the continent today.
So I'm smiling because, again, when we talk about dialogic inquiry, you're stimulating my neurons at this point with the stories from your podcast and from your own personal life. But and I think back to my experience in P12 schools, and I'm thinking about, as you mentioned, professional development. I just realized as you were talking, and things may have changed, but there's very little attention given to the individual development of teachers. What I mean by that is sitting down and understanding what someone needs, who they are, what their trajectory is, and how that person can improve in a way that's meaningful, not only in their classroom, but to the individual, him or herself. Often PD is designed, or professional development is designed as a global enterprise for all educators in the school. So I remember I taught foreign language, but we have very few foreign language, or Spanish in this case, PD opportunities, particularly at the school level, and I would say also at the district level. So often, whether you're math or whether you're other areas, you're sitting in the same professional development. And so I think as someone who's internalizes this commitment to lifelong learning, you then find yourself in a predicament where you have to try to extract something from that PD that is pertinent to your teaching and learning context, or you have to go outside of the school to edify yourself for your own professional development.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that's one of the main things that I've come to realize about podcasting, particularly the podcast that you and I do. We see it as a supplemental professional learning resource for teachers. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I realized that when I recorded my first episode almost 6 years ago, but over time, I've had teachers reach out to me and say, hey, Kwame, we're using one of your episodes in one of our PDs to start the school year. Or we're using this episode as a centerpiece for a deeper conversation about X, Y, and Z. So these are some of the messages that I've received over the years over social media from different people who I've never met a day of my life. And they'll give me snapshots of the screen, and you see the staff watching and things like that. So when I recognize that, now it's like, okay, how can I maximize on this podcast and make it even more of a learning resource for teachers? Because clearly people are looking at this podcast, what can I create off of it that's going to continue to make it an invaluable resource? And one thing I actually did real quick was at the height of COVID, there was a lot of remote learning going on. Teachers were at home, they weren't in school, and you saw an influx of virtual conferences taking place during that time. And I actually attended a couple of them, and I was like, yo, I should try this out. Like, I want to do a summit. Now, I'm maybe 50 episodes in on the podcast. So what I did was I reached out to 20 of my previous guests, and I got them all together for a meeting. And I told them what my vision was for the Stay True to Teacher and You virtual summit. And I said, hey, I would love for you all to be the facilitators for this 4-day event. Y'all down? And they were like, yeah, let's do it. So my presenters were past podcast guests, every single one of them. And I was able to put together a virtual conference at the height of COVID, where 140 teachers across the globe attended and got an invaluable learning experience. That stemmed from a podcast. And even with Learn to Relearn, you got the book, you've seen some of the podcast episodes at the end of the chapters. You go to the website, learntorelearn.com. What's on the website? Those same podcast episodes that relate to the main themes of each of the chapters in the book. So I've realized that the podcast is something that can be repurposed in so many different ways to reinforce the professional learning that teachers should be experiencing in their context.
So we're speaking with Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, who is the founder of Identity Talk Consulting, a global education consulting firm, and author of the book, Learning to Relearn. So Kwame, that was an excellent segue to get us into the book. So thank you for that. So I'm holding your book, Learning to Relearn, Supporting Identity in a Culturally Affirming Classroom. Oh, you got the book up too. There we go. Your book is constructed around the exploration of identity and opens with a social cultural analysis of different community groups who have been marginalized, and evolves into what I might say is somewhat of a framework for readers to engage in identity work. So it's partly workbook as well, partly an academic book. So tell us about the intent behind the design of the book.
Yeah, and this was a 3-year process. So I think in terms of the design, this is maybe between 2019 and 2023-ish. There was a lot of talk around anti-racism, a lot of talk around anti-bias, right? And I had read a lot of books that were speaking to that issue. And there were certain books that were focused exclusively on one specific historically marginalized community. A lot of good books. So then I thought to myself, I don't think anyone has written a book that has covered all the main historically marginalized communities in one setting, with depth, with a full historical analysis about how what they've experienced historically has served as a vehicle for perpetuating the issues that they experience in our K-12 school systems. So that was the motivation for how this book was framed. I wanted to include all those communities and do deep dives so that people had historical context for why those different communities were experiencing the issues that they experienced, right? So that was the first part of it. But then the other part too is, with any book that's for teachers, you want it to be practical. Theory is great. I mean, as an academic, you appreciate theory, but you also appreciate the practicality, the applicability of the knowledge. So that's why when you look at the book, the first half, as you mentioned, is focused on doing those deep dives on struggling marginalized communities. So we're talking about our indigenous and native communities. We're talking about our Latinx communities, our Asian American Pacific Islander communities, right? Our Black communities. So we're talking the African diaspora. And then we're also talking about our LGBTQIA community and people who are neurodiverse, or they have disabilities, or receive learning support in some shape or form. So all those different people are in the book. And it's simply a book, especially the second half of it, is where we talk about what are some of the things that we can do to support our historically marginalized students, and essentially all students in these settings. What does it mean to be an identity affirming educator? What does it mean to create spaces of belonging where none of these students have to leave parts of their identity at the door? What does that look like? And how can you create that welcoming space in your classroom? And that's where all the strategies and all the tools and insights come in in the second half of the book.
So I appreciate how you ground this project with the infusion of your story, your personal journey as a learner and as a teacher. So how did that approach shape you as a scholar, an educator, an advocate throughout the development of the book? So we're going back to this notion of reflection, but also, as we talked about, internal talk around identity. So you're talking about yourself and laying this book out to give examples. How did it shape you?
You know what? I didn't realize it as I was writing it, because when you're writing a book, you just write it, right? So it wasn't really a reflection. It was more of a retrospection.
Mm-hmm.
So as I'm thinking back to the journey, and I'm thinking about the title, Learning to Relearn, that's a recurring theme of my life. I had to learn to relearn what it meant to be a top achieving student. Just because I have an intellectual disability or I'm neurodiverse doesn't mean that I'm done. It doesn't mean that I can't be an honor roll student. I was an honor roll student for most of my time in K-12, and I was still neurodiverse. I graduated college, ended up getting my master's as well. I was still neurodiverse. So that part I had to relearn, right? I had to learn to relearn how, like, what it means to be a Ghanaian American. Because when you are navigating two worlds, in one world, they tell you that you're not enough, and you may get those same messages in the other world as well. So how do you make sure that you tell yourself that, you know what, you may not fit in perfectly in any space, but you're still good as who you are? That took therapy. That took reflection. That took understanding what it meant to be emotionally intelligent. And that also had an impact on my marriage, right? What it means to be a faithful partner, what it means to be a good communicator, what it means to have empathy and care for my two sons. Like, I had to learn to relearn what it meant to be a first generation Ghanaian American. Just because I can't speak my parents' home language doesn't mean that I'm less Ghanaian than someone that was born and raised there, right? Also relearning what it means to be a Black heterosexual father in a marriage, in a family. Being a trailing spouse. Never being the financial breadwinner of the family. Because we're teachers. That goes without saying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, being okay with being a nurturer, right? Like, I saw my father do that. I saw my father do the traditional male roles, right? He was the breadwinner of the family. He barely ever cooked. He went to work, and then he'd come home, he'd eat his dinner, he'd go right to bed. He wasn't really saying I love you to his children, right? Like, these were things that I saw, and I knew I didn't want to emulate when I became an adult.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about learn to relearn, it's very much applicable to my own life experience. When I think back about it, in so many different ways, learn to relearn who I am as an educator. Just because I'm not in the classroom doesn't mean that I'm not impacting students. I'm still impacting them, but in a very different way. That doesn't require me to be in the brick and mortar of a classroom. So that's a mantra that's applicable to so many aspects of our lives. And that's how I view this book.
Thank you for listening to EdUp Xcelerated Excellence. This episode is supported by the 2.0 conferences to be held in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA, April 7th through 9th, 2026. Business leaders, educators, healthcare experts, marketing and tech professionals, and founding entrepreneurs are welcome to take part. Reserve your space today and receive a 15% discount courtesy of EdUp Xcelerated Excellence with the code EDUPXE15OFF. That's EdUp XE15OFF. Check out the details in the show notes or learn more and register online at the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EDUPXE15OFF.
Are you an educational leader or organization seeking innovation or just a new perspective? Then look no further. Xcelerated Excellence Consulting is dedicated to offering support to educational leaders and their organizations to meet their full potential for excellence. Services include strategic planning and problem solving, continuous improvement expertise in areas such as assessment and accreditation, and professional development, empowering leaders, individuals, and groups for personal growth for organizational excellence. To learn more, find us online at xeconsulting.org. That's xeconsulting.org. So we're speaking with Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, who is the founder of Identity Talk Consulting, a global educational consulting firm, and author of the book, Learning to Relearn. So when you hear from readers, what are they enjoying about the book, and what comments are shaping your thoughts for your future work?
I love this question. And I've been fortunate to have a number of book talks around the book over the past several months. And the one thing that they keep bringing up in our conversations is the fact that this is a book that speaks to who they are. They read the book and they can relate to the stories. They can relate to what it was like in their childhood to navigate these different school spaces. And most of the readers, a good number of my readers, are white women. And when they engage with it, obviously there's guilt, but they also see that, hey, there are certain things that I'm already doing in the classroom that are working, but there are also ways in which I may be subconsciously imposing harm on my students. So they have their own epiphanies just from reading the book. And then there's a subgroup of white women who either are in interracial relationships or they've adopted Black or brown students into their families. So to read a book like mine, they're able to get some insight on how they can be real supportive as either an adopted parent or as a partner in an interracial relationship. So there's a lot of different groups of people that have been impacted by the book. And I think the one thing that they come out of it saying is it gives them hope. It gives them hope that they can, within this sphere of influence, have an impact, a positive impact in their classrooms with their students. even with everything else that's going on, all the noise, all the political noise, they can still have an impact. And there's some valuable tools in this book that will allow for them to do that.
So guilt, this idea of guilt, and that jumped out at me. But also this idea of, let me slow this down a bit. Let me slow down my brain a bit because I said neurons are firing. The idea of guilt, but I think what you're speaking to is really what we've been talking about around identity work. Is that this is. Reading the book it causes it sort of guides a reflective process, or at least stimulates that idea of reflecting. And then I think from that reflection comes this idea of guilt. And you talked about going to therapy and self-work. And I think we all, whether it's the issue of, like you said, race-based guilt, white guilt, but I think we all feel guilt when we feel as though our impact wasn't enough, or I could have done better. But I think we also have to step back and realize the context in which we were in at that time. We knew less, or we didn't know, or our perspectives were very narrow. So now you read the book, your perspectives expand, or you think back and says, oh, but these other constraints were occurring at the same time, and I had to make a strategic decision. But you forget about that part, and you hold on to this idea of I wasn't enough, or the impact wasn't enough. And I think that's the general principle of how guilt works, and then how do you work through that? Kwame, I want to know, and I'm sure the guests want to know, what is next for you, and how might the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community connect with you and the work that is forthcoming?
Oh man. As far as what's next, there's quite a few things. I think first and foremost, I always like to let people know that, yes, while I am a podcaster, I'm also a consultant. I was a consultant first before becoming a podcaster. So for any schools, any organizations, any educators who are looking for any professional learning opportunities for this 2025-2026 school year, you can make sure you go to the Identity Talk website at identitytalk4educators.com. Over there, you'll learn about the different services and offerings that I provide, including keynote speaking, in-person and virtual workshops. We also provide a library of e-courses for asynchronous learning. And for my educators who want to do what you and I are doing right now, they want to create content, they want to elevate their voices. I do offer now content creation consulting for educators who want to elevate their professional profile by building content and increasing their digital footprint in this space. So those are the services that I offer. And then for anybody who wants to continue the conversations that they've started in Learn to Relearn, but they may not be in a setting or a space where they can have those conversations openly. The forum is the place where you can have the conversations and have it in an unfiltered way where you're not going to get fired from your job. So with the forum, it's kind of a Patreon-like space where there's perks. So there's bonus episodes of the podcast. There's a monthly newsletter that you get. There's also discounts on Identity Talk merch. So shirts, accessories, you get discounts on that. And you can get discounts on the different books I've written, and there's 3 of them where you can get some discounts on it. So there are many perks that come with this membership. But the biggest thing for me is creating a space where we can continue the conversations. The conversations don't have to end when you close that book. Let's keep them going. Let's create some new spaces where we can keep this professional learning alive. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can make sure you go to the website again, identitytalk4educators.com. You can click on Become a Member. on the menu. And over there, you'll learn about the different membership tiers for the forum, if that's something you want to engage in and you want to give back in that way. And one quick note I want to make for content creators, for creatives, for education consultants, particularly Black and Brown consultants, this is what's going to allow us to keep this work going. A lot of the work that we do out of our pocket. We don't get any federal funding, especially now. We don't get that. So in order for us to sustain the work, we would love for the support of our faithful listeners and consumers of our content to contribute. Whatever you can contribute. We're not asking for $1,000, but if you can give $3, if you can buy a cup, I know there's that app. If you could Cash App every now and then, we greatly appreciate that. But let's keep in mind that that's not the goal for us. The goal is to keep education alive, but we need to do that with funds. And if the funds aren't there, it makes it difficult for us to do what we're doing today.
Then they say in church, amen. So, Sarfo-Mensah, thank you for this opportunity to learn with and from you here at EdUp Xcelerated Excellence.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you for engaging with EdUp Xcelerated Excellence, a member of the EdUp Experience Network of educational podcasts. You can find this and other episodes on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Radio, and other outlets where you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you like this episode, don't forget to follow us and share within your network. To leave a comment or suggest a guest, contact us online at edupxe.com.